Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. To begin our evening, a traditional welcome with Klahani R. Rorick.
Anyata, welcome to the 2014 Community Summit here at Elizabeth Theatre. Izia, my name is Klahani R. Rorick. I'm from the Tiskia Crow clan. We would first like to acknowledge ourselves as visitors to the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations, whose land the Queen Elizabeth Theatre resides, and extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live and learn on their territories. Adigi, Dene, Ta, Daza, Duenden, Ach, Dugi, Thana, Kanati. Creator, open our hearts and minds to the knowledge that we share today. Izia, all my relations, Madu. In honor of this day, I will share the welcome song with you, composed by the Tiaklap singers from the Native Education College.
Please welcome President and Vice Chancellor of Simon Fraser University, Andrew Petter.
Thank you, Klahani, for that wonderful greeting. Before starting this evening's event, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the tragic events that occurred in Ottawa today. Our thoughts are with the family of the soldier who was killed and with all those affected. Well, good evening. It's my privilege to welcome you to SFU Public Square's 3rd Annual Community Summit. This is a special evening, the largest in a week of events focusing on the theme of innovation and considering its impacts in areas such as healthcare, education, the environment, and the economy. Tonight, we bring it all together by asking the big question, will innovation save us? SFU's Public Square is an important part of Simon Fraser University's vision, our vision to be Canada's most community-engaged research university. It's a vision that animates everything we do at all three of our campuses in Burnaby, Surrey, and in Vancouver. Unlike traditional universities, we don't see ourselves as being set apart from the community. Rather, we see ourselves as connected to the community. Not an ivory tower, but a public square. A public square in which our students, faculty, and staff are enriched through their engagement with communities. A public square in which communities are enriched through their engagement with us. A public square for enlightenment and dialogue on key public issues. And that's why we've made it our mission to be the institution to which the community looks for education, discussion, and solutions. And that's what this Community Summit is all about, providing a forum for meaningful dialogue on issues that are important to the way we lead our lives. Some of you may remember that in 2012, we examined isolation and disconnection in our communities and discussed ways we could strengthen civic engagement across economic, geographic, and cultural divides. Last year's Community Summit took a hard look at BC's economic future in an increasingly competitive global economy. And this year, we are exploring innovation and the role it plays in our lives, our economy, and our democracy. Innovation, the shock of the possible. We're asking questions such as, what is it about innovation that is critical to the way we confront our world? After all, innovation is not a new idea. It's been central to the human experience from the very beginning. Imagining a better world is core to the human condition, fueling some of our greatest achievements, from an expanded democratic franchise to extraordinary advances in science and technology. We chose innovation as our subject for this year's Community Summit because in a world defined by change and uncertainty, innovation can be seen as both a cure and a curse. True, the word innovation connotes progress towards something better, but it's not an unqualified good. For almost every innovation that has improved the human condition, there have been serious issues and consequences with which to contend. To take a few obvious examples, technological innovation has generated enormous economic wealth, yet in advanced economies that wealth has not been widely distributed, and the gap between rich and poor has risen dramatically. Innovation has also creatively destroyed whole industries and ways of life that have thrown millions out of work and put enormous pressure on social cohesion. And of course, we can draw a direct line from the Industrial Revolution that transformed almost every aspect of human life to a warming planet that now threatens our very lives. On that note, let me pause to recognize those who participated in the summit's RISE competition earlier this week. 46 teams took on the challenge of looking at how we might adapt to rising sea levels in Metro Vancouver. Their answers brought the complexity of these issues into sharp relief and raised some further questions of their own. In a world of accelerating change, increasing uncertainty, and existential threats like climate change, how do we harness innovation to improve the world in which we live? At a time when economists predict that in countries like ours, up to 47% of jobs are at risk of being automated away over the next 2 decades, are our civic structures and political institutions capable of responding in ways that maximize the benefits of innovation while limiting its costs? What impacts will innovation have on a shared sense of community that grounds our identity and gives meaning to our lives? In sum, how do we work together to ensure that innovation contributes to a better society for all? Difficult questions, and happily, I don't have to answer them. That job goes to Richard Florida, Ray Kurzweil, and all of you here tonight. Let me say we're extremely fortunate to have these two renowned thinkers with us this evening. They are both making enormous contributions to the questions we're posing at this summit. And to introduce them and moderate tonight's discussion, we're also incredibly lucky to be joined by Amanda Lang. As many of you will know, Amanda is the CBC's senior business correspondent and a very insightful commentator on contemporary economic and social issues. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the strong support of our sponsors, Vancity and the Vancouver Foundation. So please join me in thanking them and in welcoming Amanda Lang.
The skirts go up before the wall. Good evening. I'm delighted to be here to be part of this conversation with you. And the reason that I'm particularly delighted isn't just because we have two of the great thinkers of our time, but because this subject is, I think, the most important that we face. We live in a world where change isn't just fast any longer, it's exponential. And that is a pace of change that we are not particularly qualified to meet. Some are better than others, but we face some human limitations in rising to the challenge, in reimagining how we will live in this world that is changing at this rate. The human limitations are on top of our shoulders. Our brains are literally not wired for this kind of change, for complexity. Our brains are wired for linearity. And I've done a lot of thinking and researching and reading and writing about how that is borne out through our educational system, which still encourages lateral thinking and speed. Those sorting machines in our brains like linearity. They like speed, and we're rewarded for that. But in a complex world, ambiguity is actually the outcome, and slowing things down is the best approach. So as humans, the first way to deal with the fact that we are inept at exponential change is arguably to admit it. I don't know why the first step is always admitting it, but it is in this case. And so to take a step back and say, how will we address these changes with two people who occupy a spectrum of knowledge and understanding about the world is a pretty great opportunity. One of them is one of the most accurate predictors of the future ever. The other one is one of the best descriptors of our present, an urban theorist that is world-renowned, that understands how we'll shape our future by understanding how we live now. I'm going to bring them out so you can hear from them, not me. And we hope to hear from you as well, of course, via your Twitter questions. I'm going to begin by introducing a man who probably doesn't need an introduction, neither of them really do, but Ray Kurzweil is Director of Engineering at Google these days. He's the author of 5 bestsellers. He's the recipient of countless honors. I could list all of the things he's invented, but suffice it to say that without his inventions, the idea of intelligent machines probably wouldn't exist. But many more things wouldn't exist either, including arguably parts of the internet and Google, the company he's now working with. His track record on predicting the future is so accurate that one looks at his current predictions with great interest, including a couple of them that I like. We are about 2 decades from solar power meeting all of the world's energy needs at a very low cost. And the one that I think I like even more is that we may be 15 years from a tipping point which makes death obsolete. It's funny that you like solar power more than everlasting life. I'm interested in that. But Ray, will you join us on stage, please? Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Kurzweil. Welcome. And now let me introduce Richard Florida. Richard is director of the Martin Prosperity Institute at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. He's also a professor at New York University. He's founder of the Creative Class Group, and it is as an urban theorist that he's made his name internationally recognized as one of the great thinkers. He's described in various places as one of the leading thinkers on this subject. He's helped us understand better how our cities work, how they could work better, how we live in them. He understands and shares with us how to use information about that to shape policy in a way that gives us a much better chance at living in better cities as we move down the road. His recent work is on what divides cities, which is a fascinating look at the differences in who lives where and why, which again will shape policy, I'm sure, for decades to come. So I'm delighted to welcome and ask to speak first, Richard Florida.
Well, thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Vancouver. It is always amazing to be back in this incredible city, which to my wife Rana and I is the most beautiful city on the planet. I'm really honored to share the stage with Amanda and especially with Ray Kurzweil, who is really an idol and a mentor of mine. Ray, I've read most everything you've written. And before I became an academic, I was an aspiring guitar player. And I had a band. My dad wanted to name us Richard Florida and the Sunshines. We didn't like that name. We called ourselves the Motivators, even cheesier. But boy, oh boy, electronic music and really your work in developing a synthesizer that plays musical sounds. And, you know, if you're up for it, go see that Stevie Wonder tour that's coming on where he's going to play that fantastic album that Ray helped make possible. Well, I'm going to talk about the big picture. And I'm going to try to answer the question that was posed to us by the organizers of this incredible public square and community summit. Will innovation save us? And I'm going to submit, or I'm going to answer with a qualified yes. And I think it's mainly a yes, and I think that Ray will tell us about the actual innovations that he knows more about than anyone in the world. But what I want to suggest is that the innovations will save us. I listened very closely to Andrew's remarks, and the facts that innovations both create tremendous opportunity for economic growth and prosperity, but as you know, right here in this city, and dare I say, I hail from Toronto, a city that's not at all divided. We just elected that crazy crack-smoking mayor for no reason. He will be gone next week. Banished to Etobicoke. But innovation will save us if we make it work for us. If we can harness the innovations as we've done in the past in Canada and the country Ray and I hail from, the United States, and if we can build social mechanisms and economic mechanisms, that I'm going to take this further because I'm an urban planner and a geographer, if we can build cities and metropolitan areas that allow those innovations to flourish in ways that benefit all of us. Because, in fact, cities are our greatest innovation. They're the greatest innovation of human civilization, and they are really and truly the font of all the specific innovations, individual innovations, we as human beings create. Now, if you're a sentinel observer, if you watch Amanda's phenomenal television program, which reboots next week, if you follow the business press, if you've ever heard of a man named Larry Summers, who is arguably the most important economist in the United States, and very disgruntled he didn't become the Fed chair, but that's neither here nor there, Larry will tell you that we are screwed. That we have entered a period, Ray and Amanda, all of you, of secular stagnation. That we in the advanced countries have exhausted the productive forces. He and another very good friend of mine, Tyler Cowan, who was a colleague of mine at George Mason, that we have run down the rate of innovation, that the rate of innovation that was so great 100 years ago with the birth, or 150 years ago, with the birth of the Industrial Revolution, has slowed to a trickle. And we are really screwed because we are going to secularly stagnate for a long time. But if you read history like I do, you'll realize this isn't the first time the theory of secular stagnation has been prognosticated. Way back in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, there was a professor at Harvard named Alvin Hansen. He was called the American Keynes. And he argued in the height of the Great Depression that the advanced world, the United States and Canada and Europe, had exhausted the productive forces. He coined the term secular stagnation, and he said that we would never recover. Now, his colleague at Harvard, an Austrian economist named Joseph Schumpeter, who coined the term creative destruction, had another perspective. And his perspective was that what powers capitalism, what allows it to recover, are bursts of innovation and creative destruction that create new industries and destroy existing ones. Well, I wrote a book at the depth of the crisis. It's called The Great Reset. I didn't call it a Great Recession. I didn't call it a Great Depression. I called it a Great Reset. And I went back and I looked at the history of all recent economic crises since the time of the great economists, since the time of Adam Smith and Karl Marx and David Ricardo. And I went back and looked closely at when innovation occurs. Well, if you're a student of the Industrial Revolution, and you're a student of the great economic crash of the late 19th century, the so-called Panic and Long Depression, which many people argue was even worse in its implications than the Great Depression of the 1930s, that period of the 1880s and 1890s are what scholars today are convinced is one of the greatest periods of innovation in world history. It was a period when formerly simple factory and machining industries were turned into progressive and propulsive mass production industries. Guess, according to the great economic historian Alexander Field, what was the single most innovative decade of the 20th century? It wasn't the 1980s, it wasn't the 1990s, it wasn't the 2000s when we invented all sorts of financial shenanigans. It was the decade of the 1930s. The decade of the 1930s is when a whole new form of systematic mass production, which set off a wave of growth throughout the advanced world, the likes of which humanity has never seen before. A phenomenal economist from Sussex University, a dear friend of mine and a mentor to me, a man named Christopher Freeman, probably the leading economist of innovation and of science of our time, figured this out. He said that what happens in an economic crisis is we get used to making money the easy way. We get used to speculating and betting on housing and real estate and all sorts of financial shenanigans, and the economy blows up. But what happens in the wake of the crisis is we have to make money, and we have to invest in the real economy and in entrepreneurs who are developing real innovations. A whole series of innovations that Ray will tell you about today bunch up. They begin to get organized and to be collected, and during the beginnings of a recovery, the stage we're in now, those innovations that have bunched up and collected for a decade or two, sitting on the sidelines, all of a sudden get organized and harnessed, and venture capitalists invest, and they power a new epic of growth. You see, what we are living through today is the greatest economic transformation in human history. And Ray will tell you more about that. In all heretofore human history, we made money principally by harnessing natural resources. All the way up until the Industrial Revolution, we generated wealth and prosperity by tilling our soil, by harnessing nature, by farming better, by developing agricultural community and mercantile communities with ports and harbors. And then in the Industrial Revolution, that incredibly disruptive and traumatic period that Marx and others wrote about, we added technology and capital. But still, when economists talked about the key factors of production, they would tell you there were three: land, labor, and capital. And that our economy was still delimited mainly by natural resources and the physical labor power of workers. Think about the growth and development of Vancouver. The natural resources industries, the forestry industries, the shipping industries, the heavy industries, the machining and manufacturing industries. But over the past couple of decades, that's all started to change. We've seen the rise of global competitors. China's became the world's factory. Large parts of North America, my professors told me, deindustrialized. But we began to invent a new economic system in places like Silicon Valley or Greater Boston, and we can name many others. They began to harness a new means of production and a new mode of production that was inside people's heads. Other people have called this an information revolution, a cybernetic information, a post-industrial revolution. Peter Drucker called it the knowledge economy. I call it a creative economic revolution. At the turn of the last century, more than half of people in Canada or the United States worked on farms. Less than 10% of us worked in the knowledge and creative industries of science, technology, arts, culture, entrepreneurship, and the professions. By the year 1950, we had become a manufacturing economy. More than half of us, as many as 60% of us, worked in or around factories. Less than 15% of us were members of the creative economy. Beginning in 1980, this creative economic tsunami overtakes us. Today, in the United States or Canada, more than a third of the workforce are members of what I dub the creative class. Those scientists, those technologists, those entrepreneurs, those computer scientists and researchers, software engineers, musicians, artists, culturally creative, designers, and knowledge workers. In Vancouver, 450,000 workers are members of the creative class. 36.5% of your workforce. And in certain neighborhoods of downtown Vancouver, we've mapped this. I showed the map in the Vancouver Sun. Very lovely and quite accurate story, in fact. Today, more than 80 or 90% of the workforce and residents of the downtown core are members of the creative class. Tragically, the working class has shrunk to 170,000 people. Less than 15% of your workforce, and you know what, in Canada or the United States and in Europe, less than 5% of the workforce currently make things directly in factories. But Andrew mentioned the economic divide, and you could see it here in this community. The members of the creative class are doing fairly well. They make up 36% of the workforce here. They take home half the wages, and they produce 3/4 of the purchasing power. It's the members of the service class, the people who work in retail sales and clerical work and food preparation, who fall further and further behind. And that's the divide we're faced with. And that's the divide that produced Rob Ford in my adopted hometown of Toronto. But you know what? Every single human being is creative. And the key task that really awaits us is not simply to harness the innovative capability and the knowledge of the software genius or biotech genius or robotic genius. It's to harness the creativity that lies deep inside every single individual. I heard this not from great academics, I heard it from my father. My father was born in 1921 in Newark, New Jersey. He worked in a factory in the ironbound section of Newark. My dad took that job when he was 13, and he worked in that factory until he was 1965. And when I was a young boy, I asked my father to take me to the factory so I could see where he worked. He said, "Richard, it's my job to work in a factory, so you don't have to. It's your job to get an education and get ahead in life." But on Saturdays, when the factory was running overtime, he would relent. And I would approach that factory in my dad's car, a giant behemoth brick building that made eyeglass frames, Victory Optical, in the ironbound section of Newark. I would see the machines whirring, making the plastic frames and the metal frames. I would see hundreds of workmen, Irish Americans, Italian Americans, African Americans, Hispanic Americans. And I was so fascinated by technology. My dad would see me looking at the machines and he'd say, "Rich, it's not the machines that make this factory great. It's the knowledge, it's the intelligence, it's the creativity of the people who work for it." Every single human being is creative. And that's why I say creativity requires diversity. And that's why places like Vancouver and Toronto and Canada and the Silicon Valley have an edge. Because they are open to outsiders. They are open to the different. Oh, I get in trouble with my gay index and my bohemian factor. And people say, has Florida lost his mind? Does he really think street guitarists and gay people are the source of innovation? No. They signal a place that is open to the new and to the different, where the innovative mind, the musical mind, the artistic mind, the creative mind, the entrepreneurial mind can nest and create and build anew. Well, if the creative economy and this economic tsunami is the fundamental fact, if the creative revolution is the underlying force that will produce the innovations that can save us, there's a second revolution that we are undergoing that creates the container that creates the vessel that we have to make to allow the innovation and creative revolution to make us all better, to benefit more of us and hopefully all of us. That's the urban revolution. The second great revolution we are living through is an urban revolution where at the turn of the 1900s, 14% of the world's population lived in cities. In 2008, 50% of the world's population lived in cities. And over the course of the next generation, we will put another 3 to 5 billion people in cities across the world, and 75 to 80% of us. We will spend more hundreds of trillions of dollars building cities over the course of the next generation and the next century than we have spent in all of heretofore human history. My dad worked in a factory. I told you that. He worked in that factory for life. Factories are what powered the old industrial economy. Oh, I visited factories. I visited great factories all over Canada, the United States, and Europe, and Japan. I studied factories for the first half of my career. Factories were the social and economic organizing unit of the old industrial age. You had a job for life, just like my dad. What's good for General Motors is good for the country, John F. Kennedy said. IBM didn't stand for International Business Meetings. It stood for I've been moved. You went where the company sent you. The economic, social, and organizing unit of our age is the city itself. It is the collector of knowledge. It is the collector and harnesser of Silicon Valley. The factories of our times are the Silicon Valleys, the San Francisco Bay Areas, the Vancouvers, the Torontos, the Waterloos, and I can go on. And I didn't figure this out. The person who figured this out was my mentor, the great adopted Canadian, Jane Jacobs. Jane told me in her living room in the annex, she said, "Richard, I think I figured out something that puzzled economists before me. They think that what makes the economy great is the division of labor in a factory. Isn't that what Adam Smith was talking about with his pin factory example?" Well, she said, factories can make existing things more efficient. Great venture capitalists in Silicon Valley 20 or 25 years ago when I first went there told me, if we want to create something new, we have to create a new company. Jack White said this about the Detroit music scene. He said, the reason a great music scene is phenomenal. Steve Jobs said this about technology scenes. The reason technology scenes or music scenes thrive is because people combine and recombine. They meet new people. They create new teams. They create new bands. And out of thousands, hundreds and thousands of iterations, new things are bloomed. Our cities are the template, are the platform. And we see it now with the invention of all of these new companies from Uber to Airbnb. The city itself is the arena for innovation. In fact, startup companies are migrating back from the suburbs to the city. San Francisco is now home to more investment in new startups, not incumbent existing companies, than is the Silicon Valley itself. New York City, which used to get not a penny of venture capital investment, now attracts $3 billion a year. Our cities are the arenas of innovation, and our great friends at the Santa Fe Institute, a group of physicists and biologists and economists, they actually put a deeper theory on Jane Jacobs' insights. They said, of all biological and social organisms, as we get bigger, as we move from an ant to a cat to a dog, to a horse to a cow, humans are somewhere in the middle there, to an elephant, as we get bigger, our metabolism's slow. But there is one social organism that's metabolism gets faster as it grows. That has to have an increasingly faster and more innovative, creative metabolism, and that's the city itself. You see, globalization hasn't made the world flat. It hasn't spread out the world. It's actually made it spiky. And we took the satellite images of the world at night, and we extracted the real centers of economic activity in the world. There are 40 megaregions, collections of cities and metropolitan areas, the Boston, New York, Washington corridor, Northern California, Southern California, Greater Tokyo, Greater London, the area that stretches from Shanghai to Beijing, from Mumbai to Bangalore. You live in one. We call it Cascadia. From Vancouver to Seattle to Portland, $600 billion in economic output, larger than the entire economy of Switzerland. The world's 40 largest megaregions account for less than 18% of our population, produce 2/3 of our economic output, and 9 in 10 of our innovations. Our task today is to build cities that can harness this innovation, to achieve density. Talked about that in the Vancouver Sun this morning. To make sure our cities are compact, that innovators and creatives have a go, that they're diverse, that they're open-minded, that there's a kind of place that can incubate and create these startups. Well, the clock on the floor, it's not on the wall, tell me my time is running out, so I want to share a kind of a local story with you. About 20 years now, I was invited just down the road to Seattle. And I was invited there by the then mayor to help them figure out what to do with the core of their city that at that time was quite dilapidated. We were going by boarded up bookstores and saw a few sprouting art galleries and some lovely coffee shops and a lot of desolation and despair. Of course, that has all changed, and Seattle has bounced back remarkably. It's become one of these great spikes of the global economy. And out of the distance, I saw rising a new building that looked quite odd to me. It was quite curvilinear, and I didn't know who the architect at the time was, but it was a major commission, an early major commission by the now well-known and great architect Frank Gehry. And Lord, I wanted to know how that was happening. What was making this incredible building rise in downtown Seattle? And they said, oh, that's what one of our city fathers, a fellow named Paul Allen, who happens to be, you may know this because you live in this region, happens to be the co-founder of Microsoft with Bill Gates, and a person who is one of the 5 or 10 richest people in the world, owns a couple of major sports teams, loves to play rock and roll, and is just an interesting, innovative, creative guy who wanted to give back to his hometown. So I thought, what could it be? So the first thing that struck me was that it had to be the new Seattle Center for Science. Because the person who would have influenced Paul Allen had to be a great scientist or mathematician, a mind like Einstein. But my friends in Seattle told me, the mayor said, no, it had nothing to do with that. My second guess was that it had to be the Seattle Hall of Invention, because Paul Allen, as we know, wasn't just a scientist. He was something like our colleague Ray Kurzweil. He was an inventor. A Hall of Invention. Thomas Edison must have been his inspiration. Well, my third guess was a little bit cruder and crasser. I thought, well, this guy's worth 10 or $15 billion. Yeah, science and invention, but what he was really motivated by was money. So this was going to be the center for robber baron, crude, capitalistic entrepreneurship. But of course, it was none of those things. It was the Jimi Hendrix Experience Music Project. And it took a while to dawn on me. But as a young boy, playing guitar in my bedroom and in my basement, the person who motivated me, who was my boyhood idol, was this young African-American guitarist named Jimi Hendrix, but not just me, Paul Allen. Paul Allen, the person who inspired him, the person who he wanted to build a homage to, the person who he wanted to celebrate from his town in Seattle, was a guy who helped us rethink what was meant by playing blues and soul, who lived in Nashville, was stationed at Fort Benning, and played in country, played on the Chitlin Circus when African Americans couldn't go to regular hotels and had to play, played with the Isley Brothers, loved Little Richard and Buddy Guy. And he heard these different kinds of sounds, and he moved to England. He founded a band with 2 British guys. They called themselves The Experience, but he wasn't just a musician. He was somebody like Ray. He was a technological innovator. He often said he didn't play guitar, he played amplifier and effects. He wanted to make that guitar set differently. He worked with other technological innovators on new effects pedals. He took Leslie speakers that rotate and put them into the mix. He developed new amplification techniques that made him louder, and he bought his own studio, Electric Lady Studios, where he and other musicians could control the technological means of production, where they could sit in sofas and jam and play all night and create the music that is still coming out today. See, you never know where that creative spark is going to come from. You never know who's going to motivate that great individual genius. Creativity requires diversity. Creativity and innovations require great cities. And if innovation is going to save us as it can, it will be up to us to build the cities and the social structures that make that creativity and innovation work for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. We will now turn it over to Ray, right?
Great. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk about exponentials, and I also want to talk about the nature of innovation and the part of the brain that does that. So these are all the implications of what I call the law of accelerating returns. Any questions on any of this? Well, do think and submit a good question, but I'll talk about it a little more slowly. I'll show you the first graph that I came up with in 1981. This is the price performance of computing, calculations per second per constant dollar, back to the 1890 American census, the first to be automated. And this is not a linear graph. We're not adding, as you go up the x-axis, we're not adding to something. We're adding zeros to what we're measuring, orders of magnitude. So every labeled level on this graph is 100,000 times greater than the level below it. So this little curve represents trillions-fold increase in the amount of computation you can get for the same cost over the last century. Several billion-fold just since I was a student. And people look at this and they go, oh, Moore's Law. But Moore's Law is just that part on the right having to do with chips. They were shrinking vacuum tubes in the 1950s to keep this exponential growth going. 1952, CBS predicted the election of Eisenhower, the first time the networks did that with a vacuum tube-based computer. And they were making the vacuum tubes smaller and smaller. I have a little museum, and I have a computer with tiny little vacuum tubes. Late 1950s, they couldn't shrink the vacuum tube anymore and keep the vacuum, and that was the end of the shrinking of vacuum tubes. So it was not the end of the law of accelerating returns. It just went to the next paradigm, transistors, and then to chips. And people have been regularly predicting the end of Moore's Law. Gordon Moore originally said 2002. Justin Ratner, the CTO of Intel, now says 2022. But he will also show you in their labs the sixth paradigm, self-organizing three-dimensional molecular circuits, which he feels will take over in the late teen years, which will keep this going for a very long time. But the most interesting thing about this, by the way, a straight line on a logarithmic scale is exponential growth. Is actually slow exponential growth and the rate of exponential growth. And I have a whole thesis on why this happens. We always use the latest technology to invent the next. We're inventing the computers of 2016 with the computers of today. We couldn't do that in 2002. But the most interesting thing about this is look at how smooth and predictable a curve that is. I mean, I had this through 1980 and 1981, and I predicted it out to 2050, and it's right where it should be now in 2014. Where's World War I on this graph? World War II, the Cold War, the Great Depression. People say, well, it must have slowed down during the recent recession, but that's not the case. It has kind of an inexorable mind of its own. And I won't dwell on all these different examples, but I was very excited in 1968 I could buy a transistor that could actually switch a bit of information for only $1. Today you can buy 10 billion for $1, and they're better because they're smaller, so the electrons have less distance to travel, so they're faster. The cost of a transistor cycle, which is a measure of price performance in electronics, doubles every year, which is to say the cost for the same functionality comes down by half every year. That's why you can buy an iPhone today or an Android phone that's twice as good as the one 2 years ago for half the price. That's a fourfold increase in price performance. That's a 50% deflation rate. And all of information technology has a 50% annual deflation rate. And the economists worry about deflation. We had massive deflation during that Great Depression of the 1930s. And the concern is more and more industries are becoming information technologies. And if I can buy the same stuff, and I am also including physical stuff, because I'll talk about three-dimensional printing in a moment, for half the price, as I could a year ago, okay, I'll buy more. That's Economics 101. But am I actually going to double my consumption? Because after all, how much do I need? Aren't I going to saturate my ability to consume these resources? And if I don't double, let's say I increase it 50% every year, which is a lot, then the size of the economy, not as measured in bits, bytes, and base pairs, but as measured in constant currency, will shrink. And for a variety of good reasons, that would actually be a bad thing. But that's actually not what happens. This is bits of memory shipped. I have 50 consumption graphs like this. We actually more than double our consumption every year. There's been 18% growth in every form of information technology every year for the last 50 years, despite the fact that I can get twice as much of it each year for the same cost. And the reason for that is the purpose of this conference, which is innovation. We keep inventing new capabilities which consume these resources. I mean, why weren't there social networks about 8 years ago? Was it because Mark Zuckerberg was still in junior high school? No, there were attempts to do it. There were arguments, can we afford to allow our users to download a picture? The price performance wasn't there. About 5 years ago, it came into place, and that application exploded. Why weren't there search engines before 15 years ago? I wrote in the early 80s, over 30 years ago, that the ARPANET, the predecessor to the internet, was growing exponentially, would create a World Wide Web emerging in the late 1990s, which would connect hundreds of millions of people to each other and to vast knowledge resources. And there'd be so much information we wouldn't be able to find anything, so we would need a search engine. And the computational and communication resources to create a search engine would be in place by the late 1990s. And indeed, Google was founded in 1998, but there were 50 other projects to do that. Not everything is predictable. That it would be these couple of kids in a Stanford dorm who would take over the world of search, that was not predictable. But that there would be a search engine and it would be needed and feasible by the late 1990s was predictable. And I did predict that in my first book. Time magazine had a cover story on my law of accelerating returns. They wanted to print my computer graph. They wanted to include a particular computer they had covered in the magazine a few weeks earlier, which is the last point on this graph, and it's right on the curve. And this is a curve I laid out 30 years earlier. So this aspect of the future is remarkably predictable. And I mentor some early stage companies and other innovators, and this is my primary lesson to write down the technologies that affect your business and where will they be in 3 or 4 years, and make sure that your technology and business plans are in concert with that. I continually see plans that assume the world's 3 or 4 years from now will be the same as we see today. But just look back a few years, and people weren't using Wikipedia and social networks and blogs. And people forget that very quickly. We very quickly get used to the way the world was, and we forget what it was like 5 years ago, let alone 200 years ago when life expectancy was 37. Communication technology. This is the number of bits moved around wirelessly in the world. So this, over the last century ago, that was Morse code over AM radio. Today's 4G networks, this is again a logarithmic scale, trillions-fold increase over the last 100 years. But again, look at how smooth a progression that is. And internet data traffic smoothly doubling every year. This is the graph I had of the ARPANET. I had the first few points in the 1980s and projected out a World Wide Web by the late 1990s. This is the same data, but seen on a linear scale. That's how we experience the world. We don't experience it in this sort of logarithmic domain. So to the casual observer, it looked like, whoa, World Wide Web, brand new thing, came out of nowhere, but you could see it coming. And I mentioned the Genome Project, which is a perfect exponential and was the enabling factor for the biotechnology revolution, which will ultimately transform health and medicine. Again, very smooth exponential growth in the amount of genetic data, which has continued through the present day, and an exponential decline in the cost of genetic sequencing. And an exponential improvement in our ability to model, simulate, and reprogram this outdated software. Three-dimensional printing, there's a lot of hype about it now. I've written actually about the life cycle of innovation and invention. And generally there's an early period where enthusiasts see the revolution, but they over-anticipate it. Exponentials ultimately are explosive, but they're not instantaneous. You could be doubling tiny little numbers for a very long time. And we're kind of in that over-enthusiastic period now. I believe for the really exciting applications of three-dimensional printing, we need submicron resolutions. We're now at several microns where the resolution is improving at a rate of about 100 in 3D volume per decade. We'll be there about 2020. We've seen that actually in every technology. If you remember the internet boom in the 1990s, if you had dog.com, you were a billionaire. Then around the year 2000, people realized, gee, you know, you really can't make money with these internet companies. And there was the bust, and it almost brought down the economy. But then it came back as we actually realized the necessary parameters of this revolution, and those capabilities came into place. And now we have companies that are internet companies, like Google, Apple, Microsoft, that are worth hundreds of billions. The same thing will happen in three-dimensional printing. For example, around 2020, we'll be able to print out clothing, and there'll be lots of open source designs that are free and cool, and you can download them and print out clothing at pennies per pound, which is what three-dimensional printing costs. And people say, oh, there goes the fashion industry. But let's look at some other industries that have already dematerialized. So if I wanted to send you a music album or a movie or a book, just a few years ago, I'd send you a Federal Express or postal package. Today, I can send you an email attachment. But the revenues of those industries have actually gone up, not down, despite the fact that there is a robust open source free market. There are millions of songs and documents and books and videos and movies that you can download for free, that many of which are very good quality, and you have a very good time with these free media products, but people still spend money to read Harry Potter, see the latest blockbuster, get music from their favorite artist, and you have the coexistence of a free open source market, which is a great equalizer, so everybody has access to high quality products at virtually no cost, and a proprietary market. That's going to be the nature of the economy as more and more industries become dematerialized. So let me just quickly give you a 1-minute tour of the implications of this, because people say, well, we're getting poorer, there's more and more disparity, our health is getting worse, and people don't remember what things were like a few years ago, let alone 200 years ago. These circles are countries. The x-axis is income per person in today's dollars on a logarithmic scale, so you can understand the scale. The y-axis is life expectancy. So there were wealthy countries and poor countries. The big red circle is China. It does some interesting things. And this was the first industrial revolution. A few countries are experimenting with it. But as you get to the 20th century, the 1900s, you'll see a wind that carries all of these countries towards the upper right-hand corner of the graph. The have-not divide does not go away, but the countries that are worst off at the end of this process are far better off than the countries that were best off at the beginning of the process. And I shouldn't say end of the process, because this is going to go into high gear when we get to the more mature phases of the three-dimensional printing revolution, the biotechnology revolution, and so on. And we're increasing our investment in education dramatically. And one last point, this is a study I did with Larry Page, actually before he got this new job, for the National Academy of Engineering in the United States on solar energy, which was alluded to earlier. There's an exponential growth as we are driving down the cost using technologies like nanotechnology. It's been doubling every 2 years for the last 30 years. When we did the study, it was 0.5%. People dismissed it, 0.5%, it's a nice thing to do, but that's a fringe player, ignoring the exponential growth, just as they ignored the exponential growth in the Genome Project when it was 1%, or the internet when it was 1%. At that time, 0.5% was 8 doublings at 2 years each from meeting 100% of the world's energy needs. It's been 4 years later now, and it's doubled twice again, and now it's 2%, and so it's 6 doublings from 100%. When it doubles 6 more times and is meeting all of our energy needs, we'll be using 1 part in 10,000 of the sunlight that falls on the Earth. We are awash in these resources, and it will take the 21st century technologies to tap them. There's a similar story on water and food, which maybe we'll get into in the discussion. And this is the trend we had before health and medicine was in information technology. Life expectancy was less than 20,000 years ago. It's quadrupled in 1,000 years. It's doubled in 200 years. It's going to go into high gear as we get to the more mature phases of the biotechnology and nanotechnology revolutions. According to my model, about less than 15 years from now, we'll be adding more than a year every year, not just to infant life expectancy, but to your remaining life expectancy. Life expectancy is a statistical phenomena. You could have a life expectancy of 50 years or whatever, but still be hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow. We're working on that also with self-driving cars. But 10 to 20 years from now, as you go forward a year, your life expectancy will move on away from you. So if you can hang in there, we may get to see the remarkable century ahead. Thank you very much.
Wow. What I find fascinating about both of your presentations is how optimistic they are, while acknowledging that there are destructive elements in creative destruction. Ray, I'm going to ask you to start, but Richard, this applies to you as well. We need to dwell a little bit on the destructive element. And I understand that we can look back at the Luddites and say how wrong they got it, but it does feel as though a lot of the technology we're creating will create wealth in the hands of the few, people that own the businesses that will generate the profit, and employ fewer and fewer people. So where will the jobs be? Can you predict the jobs of the future?
Well, let me make two comments about that. First of all, I don't agree with the premise that there'll be fewer and fewer jobs. It certainly felt that way a century ago when 1/3 of the eligible population in North America had jobs. Today it's 2/3. And the new jobs that have been created at the top of the skill ladder pay 10 times as much. There was no social safety net until 1930 when Social Security was put in place. It wasn't that people didn't think of it or weren't liberal enough. There wasn't the money to do it. So the economy is moving in the right direction. World Bank reported recently that poverty in Asia has been cut by 90% in the last 15 years. It's just not the case that people are getting poorer or that jobs are getting less prevalent. There's always a struggle at the edge. And it's in fact impossible to exactly define the new jobs because they haven't been invented yet and the industries haven't been invented yet. And try describing the jobs of today, with our perspective of 1970. So I think
will there only be jobs for intelligent people?
Well, I think we're all getting more intelligent, not only through education, but now through these brain extenders. That's been the purpose of our tools. We couldn't reach that fruit at that high branch 1,000 years ago, so we invented a tool that extended our physical reach. And we now can have access to all of human knowledge, with a few keystrokes, and we're definitely smarter. But another perspective that I would want to mention about the downsides, because there are issues of jobs, privacy, and we can get into those, but technology is a double-edged sword. Fire kept us warm, cooked our food, but also burned down our villages, and we're also empowering the technologies of destruction. And Chapter 8 of my book, Singularity is Near, is called The Deeply Intertwined Promise versus Peril of GNR. So, for example, biotechnology, where we're reprogramming biology away from cancer and heart disease and disease, presumably good things, although not everybody even agrees with that, but could also empower a bioterrorist to create a biological virus that's deadly and communicable and stealthy. So there's actually things we could do about it. I actually worked with the US Army, and we now have a rapid response system that can respond to a new bioengineered biological virus that didn't exist 10 years ago. There's also the Asilomar guidelines, ethical standards to prevent accidental problems, and there have been no accidental problems as a result over the last 30 years. It's not these are not pat answers. In fact, I think we should put an even higher priority on these downsides, and I think the downsides are there, and they can be catastrophic. I think a strong argument can be made that we've benefited far more than we've been hurt, but the dangers are there.
Richard, you describe the city, and your recent work is about the divide where the folks who do the service live, where the creative class lives, and where the working class lives. Are you optimistic that we'll work through these tensions, and or will there be a period of dislocation almost by definition?
I'm optimistic in that this economic or paradigm shift is disruptive, but it's not causing the kind of mass chaos of general strikes, horribly disruptive economic crises, world wars that we saw before. So I'm optimistic. I think what's happening is that the old physical jobs that provided a good living to people like my dad and my granddad are gone. And so we look at those and we want to bring them back. Just like the Luddites were concerned their jobs would be eliminated. And then we think, well, we're going to create new jobs, and we are, and we always do, and I think Ray said that very nicely. So what kind of jobs are we creating? We're creating about a third of our jobs that are really good jobs. They're the jobs that we have, and most of the people in this audience have, these knowledge jobs, creative jobs. And they pay a reasonably, you know, some people do extraordinarily well, but the baseline in those jobs is now close to six-figure incomes. But we're also creating about 50% of our jobs, which are just horrible, low income, low skill, routine service jobs. And I think the question is, that, and I think Ray said this nicely, is, well, my dad said this to me, when he got his job during the Depression, it took 9 people to make a family income, right? Granddad, grandma, and 6 siblings of my dad. He came back from his service in World War II as if by magic. He had one job in a factory, and it was a good job, but it wasn't by magic. There was a union movement, there was a Wagner Act, there was a New Deal, and we made that factory job that we now look at as a good job. So one thing we could do is make those service jobs better jobs by exactly what Ray said, by recognizing that those people can information process, use their knowledge, and we know this. There's a woman at MIT, Zainat Tan, who showed that when retail companies and clerical jobs and all of this service work, when companies view those people as creative, when they engage them in innovation, when they allow them to provide better customer service, the customers are happier and the profits of the company go up. And one last thing. I actually think this is a problem with cities. You know, you mentioned this report we did on divided cities. They published a map today in the Vancouver Sun where we looked at a whole host of cities. Toronto, of course, is divided because these knowledge and creative workers are colonizing the core. They're spreading out across the transit lines. But in Vancouver, it's actually even worse. You know, these knowledge workers are in the western part of the city. It's almost like there's 2 cities. Toronto, they call it the 3 cities. Vancouver's like 2 cities. And what I said in the paper, and I think this was a remarkable headline, the Luddites of today, I actually used that term, Ray, I said, were the people who don't want to increase density, that don't want to allow construction to happen, that want to protect their neighborhood for all good reasons, but are now allowing more construction in our community. And by that I mean, I don't mean that Vancouver should turn into skyscrapers like Shanghai or Hong Kong, absolutely not. But there's ways to increase density done right. And there's ways to increase density and make our cities function. In addition to that, I'll just say, I think we need much more work to increase the minimum wage. I think the minimum wage here can be much higher. We do need much more work to make service jobs better jobs and upgrade them. And we need to massively expand transit, which allows people to live in more compact, dense neighborhoods. And just finally, I think what people forget is that really the task of building a great society is a task of upgrading work and building cities where everybody can be not only included in that city, but use their creativity. And I think that's a big agenda for this next, at least the next generation.
I'll just add one point to that. 100, 150 years ago, very few people got satisfaction, were able to be creative, get part of their life definition from their jobs. They were happy if they could do dangerous and backbreaking work just to support their family. Few people did creative work. You probably know their names because they're famous musicians and writers, but that was not the case with 99% of the population.
Ray, one of the questions that we've received from the room via Twitter is how can innovation save us from climate change? Are you in the camp that thinks technology will in fact protect us from our own stupid behaviors?
Well, people, aside from climate change, talk about we're running out of resources, and all of that's true if we stick with 19th century technologies like fossil fuels. I touched on quickly solar energy, and as it utilizes 21st century technologies like nanotechnology is in fact on an exponential rise for 30 years now. And it's only 6 doublings from 100% in 2 years each. Again, a very smooth exponential rise. And it's not that everything will become solar because there's a similar phenomenon for other renewable energy sources, but it's an existence proof. well within 20 years, we can meet all of our energy needs using 1 part in 10,000 of these free renewable energy sources. There's a similar story on water. There's going to be a new vertical agriculture revolution where we can grow food with no environmental impact, hydroponic grown plants and vegetables, in vitro cloned meat without animals. PETA, the animal rights group, is not opposed to people eating meat so long as it doesn't come from animals. And the first hamburger produced that way has already been produced. It's expensive, but will come down exponentially. Ultimately, we will be very inexpensive. We can replace saturated fats with healthy omega-3 fats, recycle all the ingredients and nutrients so there's no environmental impact and no animal suffering, and ultimately be subject to the 50% deflation rate of information technology, because it will be an information technology. And Singularity University, we have a project to print out houses, one little module at a time using three-dimensional printers. I don't think the three-dimensional printers are actually cost-effective today, but they will be 5 years from now, and we'll be able to print out housing for the developing world and the developed worlds, little modules, snap them together Lego style, ultimately very inexpensively. So this is where I think we're headed. This will greatly benefit the environment.
I'd like to respond really quickly. I had a remarkable conversation last night back home in Toronto with Nahid Nenshi, and the exact same question was raised. And we both agreed that Canada and the United States' best days were ahead of us, because we're not only centers of this knowledge and creative and innovative revolution and have these urban centers of it, we also have these incredible endowments of energy in places like Houston and Calgary and the western part of this great country. And we said that, most people talk about places with great endowments of energy and say they're subject to a resource curse, they get lazy. But not in Calgary, not in Houston, not in Canada and the United States. In fact, we've used our resources to create more knowledge-based and innovative, and we've innovated around those. But what Nahid Nenshi said was really interesting, and I think he's right. For the short-term future, we're going to continue to pump carbon out of the ground. And it's better that we do it in places with the rule of law and environmental standards. But he said something that I think we all have to take seriously. We owe it an obligation to our country, Canada, the United States, and the world, to take those resources and monetize them in ways that help build a non-carbon sustainable future. And I think that is so critical, that it's our obligation, endowed with this knowledge and energy, if we can monetize it, but not waste it, not throw it away, use it in ways that raise it. Solar energy, renewables, make better ways to construct homes, and I think that's really our challenge as we move forward.
We've got a video question. Can we play the first video question?
Oh, awesome.
Hi, I'm Sherry DeVisser, Branch Manager of Vancity's West Vancouver Community Branch and Values Ambassador for the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. Dr. Florida and Mr. Kurzweil, we've heard a lot about innovation from a global perspective as it relates to technology, industry, and even creativity. My question for you today is, what does this really look like at the local level for the community and for our children? And how can innovation play a role in increasing well-being around key drivers such as local economy, society, and the environment? Thank you.
I would say Silicon Valley has become a metaphor, so it's not subject to one geographic area. I go around the world and some say, oh, our neighborhood is the Silicon Valley of Paris, and our neighborhood is the Silicon Valley of Israel. And it's really become a metaphor for applying innovation to the economy and inventing new types of work and new types of invention that can improve human life. And I think we need to teach that, and we need to transform education. My mother's mother's mother actually started a school. It was the first school in Europe to provide higher education for girls, but part of its educational philosophy is learn by doing, and we do that at Singularity University too. Now that's with graduate level students, but I think there's a version of that in every elementary school, junior high school. If I think about what I've managed to learn in my career, it's not from formal education, it's been from my projects. I had a passion to create something. I had a vision, not, oh, I'm going to learn something, that's exciting. I had a passion for trying to do something, And whether it succeeded or not, I would succeed, and children do succeed in learning something when they have a passion for creating a project.
But one of the big challenges we face, without question, is in this exponential world around information, different types of information and processing, our systems are outdated. Our systems of government, our systems of law, we have all of these global bodies that are no longer effective or up to date. Will they innovate in the same way and fast enough?
Let me pick up on her question, Amanda, and then we'll turn to yours. I too, Ray, I probably hated school worse than you. I went to Catholic school. I have like scars on my knuckles to prove it. I cut school all the time. I never went to class. I loved to play guitar. I hated university. But I learned from things that stoked my passion. And I think in many ways we learn from our communities. And that's why I think this question about building stronger and more resilient communities is key. And I really do think they're humanity's greatest invention, and they're the way the social network or the social brain. That's where real creative and innovative ideas come from. But let me just play this out. Under the Industrial Revolution, we built a very good geography that worked to our advantage. We called it suburban sprawl. And as our suburbs sprawled, and as my parents moved from Newark, New Jersey to their working class, Sopranos, New Jersey, Italian suburb called North Arlington, my dad bought a house. It was lumber and sheetrock, and he had a Chevrolet Impala, and they bought an air conditioner made in America, Frigidaire made in America, a RCA made in America. So that suburban model actually worked very well with the industrial age. That suburban model is a catastrophe for the knowledge age. We need, and dense, and Silicon Valley is dense enough. Denser areas like downtown Vancouver, parts of Silicon Valley, San Jose is becoming more walkable, Palo Alto, Cambridge, Massachusetts, parts of lower Manhattan. The knowledge and creative economy require this kind of density. So here's the rub. In order to build the factories of the future, the innovation and knowledge economies of the future, our task today is no longer to just build companies, it's to build great cities. And that was the questioner's point. I really believe that it's not simply building infrastructure of bridges and random roads and random tile. The real challenge of this 21st century, the grandest of the grand challenges, climate change, energy, poverty mitigation, innovation, job creation, is about building great and innovative cities. And the sooner we can wrap our heads around that we can only prosper by harnessing innovation and building better cities, the better off we'll be.
We did get a question via Twitter asking if cities are the engine of innovation, why they go bankrupt. Why is Detroit in the state?
Let me add one comment to that.
That's a great question.
Another thing we need is a cultural factor, which is the acceptance of failure.
Yes.
So in Silicon Valley and all of its metaphorical equivalents around the world, failure is called experience. But in many societies, failure is a disgrace, and it's a loss of face. I've always viewed failure as just success deferred. If you have a passion to achieve something, okay, that didn't work, I'm going to try something else. Yep. But that's an important cultural factor that needs to attend to innovation.
And why do cities go bankrupt goes to your question previously, Amanda, about governance. We have a governance model that was based in the agricultural or pre-agricultural feudal age, where rural areas have the power in our provincial or state legislatures in Canada and the United States and in our federal government. Every study shows this rural or agricultural bias. And in Canada, it's worse than in the United States because basically our cities have no power. All the revenue-raising capability is rested in the province. So a fellow who you know, Alan Broadbent, said, if we want to prevent our cities from going bankrupt, we have to give them the powers of provinces. You know, a city like Vancouver is probably bigger than most. Maybe there are 3, 5 provinces that are bigger than this one. A city like Toronto, a city like Calgary. So we have to create a governance model. You know, my dear friend Ben Barber, the great political theorist, has this phenomenal book. He said, If Mayors Ruled the World. You know, and while our national governments, with all respect to Prime Minister Harper and even President Obama, who I voted for, they're clueless. But the folks who understand how to create economic development, how to at least begin to address innovation, are the folks closest to the ground, are the mayors and the people who, sure. with the exception of Rob Ford. And let me just put the final but on that. Rob Ford is the product of a dysfunctional, weak mayor system where a mayor in this country has no power. So that kind of system leads to all kinds of...
That drove him to do crack?
Dysfunction.
Just kidding.
A crazy crack mayor. And here I came to this country thinking I was moving to a progressive Mecca, and I got robbed for it. But the point is that we have to strengthen our governance mechanisms, not only at the national level, but particularly at our local level, to build the cities we need to for the future.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but we've got a second video question.
Hi, my name is Sandra Singh, and I'm the Chief Librarian at the Vancouver Public Library. As a public librarian, I'm committed to universal and neutral access to information, to equitable access for everyone in our community, regardless of their socioeconomic circumstances, and to exploring how established community knowledge and social infrastructure, such as public libraries, can contribute to creativity and innovation in this digital age. Some would say that you are both utopians. How does your vision of innovation address inequity? And what opportunities do you see for established community institutions, such as public libraries, to support community creativity and innovation, both cultural creativity and its expression of the human spirit, and innovation in fields and disciplines such as STEM? Thank you.
It's not a little question. I mean, there's a lot in there.
I think I'll start, and I'll start, and I'll be really fast, and hopefully Ray will add. I taught at Carnegie Mellon for nearly 20 years, where our president, Dick Cyert, said we didn't need a library because we would have the internet. And he had a certain kind of point. So we think of libraries as just these warehouses of books. And in that sense, Dick was saying this digital revolution, and I have, my library fills an entire floor of the Rotman School, but I hardly use it. Most of the information I get is from the digital world. But our libraries are what I think most sociologists or urbanists have come to think of as thought appropriately are incredible third places. The first place is your home, the second place is your work. The third place is a place like a library. The Newark Public Library is what sort of made me an intellectual. I would go there, I would browse the shelves, I would be curious. You can meet people, you can talk with people. So rethinking our libraries, not just as warehouses of books, but as centers, as a questioner says, of cultural creativity. And then onto a question about inequity, which I think is right on. There's only one way around this question of inequity. Every single human being is creative. Right? Ray said this, 200 years ago we valued the creativity of a 1%. And then a century ago we valued the creativity of 10%. And now maybe a third of us get to make money off our creativity. But you've seen this little documentary that Jay-Z made. He's not a great scholar. He said the same darn thing. He said every little kid growing up in a ghetto has creativity within them. And the task of our society, as we get more affluent, as we develop these technologies, brain extensions and all of this, is to harness and reward that creativity. And that's the only way we can begin to deal with this inequity, particularly as we get more affluent. It not only gives us money and materialism, it gives us purpose and meaning. And I think if you look at Ray's chart where we're heading in affluence, what people really want is just not a material sense of stuff. They want a sense of purpose and a meaning. And the only way we accomplish that is by stoking that creative furnace in each and every one of us.
Well, let me address it narrowly in terms of libraries, which is how the questioner posed it, and then more broadly. So information basically was contained in books when libraries were invented. So now we have many other sources of information, and the library is being reinvented. And you go to the library, they still have lots of books, and people still read paper books, but it also is a way to provide people with free internet access and other means of accessing information. More broadly, these technologies are bringing capability, enabling people to be creative that never could do it before. My father was a noted musician, and if you wanted to hear his composition, it was a huge deal. He had to raise money, hire an orchestra. I'd be up late with him running off scores on a mimeograph machine, and finally he'd get to actually hear his composition. But then if you wanted to change it, he'd have to dismiss the musicians and go through the process all over again. Today, a kid in her dorm room can create a whole orchestra, a jazz band, a rock group herself using her inexpensive computer and MIDI software and Pro Tools and so forth. So these are great enablers of creativity. And big companies, I know the one I work for, but also its competitors are working to bring free or extremely inexpensive internet to the next several billion people. Right now there's 1 to 2 billion people that have access to it. It'll be 4 or 5 billion very soon, within a few years. There are devices coming out that'll cost tens of dollars that'll give you access to this very inexpensive internet capability. And what you can do with the internet is expanding. There's a great educational revolution happening where people can now take the best courses from the best minds for free. And there are thousands of schools in Africa where kids gather around a computer and take courses at MIT and Stanford. And they'll actually be from K through graduate school in every language, every subject within a few years for free. Yeah. And a lot of other revolutions happening that are going to bring the world of information at almost no cost to everyone and enable everybody to be a knowledge creator.
Okay, this is my last question. It's sometimes said that the last thing you say at a meeting is really why you called the meeting. This is a big question, and we don't have time for, we could spend a lot of time on this one. But it is around singularity. It is around this notion that machines will get neural networks and learning machines will get smarter and smarter. You've talked about technology as an extension of our brains. What is that relationship? In your view, you're a futurist, you've accurately predicted many, many things. Are we eventually a machine? Does the machine overtake us?
Well, I think very few people would disagree that a neuron is a machine. We've actually characterized it quite well and can describe it. It's actually not simple, but and we have some trillions of neurons, actually only 30 billion in the neocortex. And so at some level it is a machine, and we're learning actually how it works, and it's not simple, but it's not beyond our understanding. You've seen lots of science futurism movies where one person or one evil corporation or government agency gets control of the artificial intelligence or the singularity, and maybe there's a fight between a good guy and a bad guy, usually not a bad girl, but for control of the artificial intelligence, and they end up at the end of the movie fighting on the wings of an airplane for this control. And maybe the girlfriend throws a fire extinguisher at the bad guy and startles him, and the good guy gets to win. I take comfort from the fact that that is not how the technology is unfolding. It's not in 1 or 2 hands. It's right now in over 1 billion hands, and that's expanding. And our relationship to it is getting more and more intimate and integrated with it. When I was an undergraduate, I had to take my bicycle across campus, show my ID to get into the building that had the one computer, and I had to be an engineer to use it. And even at that, it was very limited. Now we all carry them around in our pockets and our belts. We're very close to them. They're beginning to make their way into our bodies and brains. I think whether it's physically inside our body and brain or not, it's actually an arbitrary distinction. They are already brain extenders, and we work very intimately with them. Very few people could do any meaningful work today at all without these brain extenders. They are part of who we are. So these intelligent AIs, it's not an alien invasion from Mars. I mean, we've always created these tools to extend our reach, and we're very deeply integrated with them.
The concern is the moment when they become smarter than us.
But it's not going to be they, because we are...
They, the machines, I mean.
But it's not us versus them. We are going to be, and we already are integrated with them. We're already much smarter than we would be without them. And that's going to continue to be the case. So we will ultimately, our intelligence will be dominated by the non-biological portion, but that's still human intelligence, in my view. The word transhumanism was mentioned earlier, and I don't like that term because it implies we're going to transcend our humanity. I think we're going to enhance our humanity. We're going to add new levels of abstractness to our neocortex and be able to think deeper thoughts, more abstract thoughts. What exists at the top of the neocortex is humor, loving sentiments. We're going to be funnier, we're going to be sexier, we're going to be more loving because we're going to integrate with this technology.
Not right away. You are both optimists about where we're headed and what's possible, and that's a wonderful thing. And I think that's a good note to finish on. I hope you will all join me in thanking Richard Florida and Ray Kurzweil.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you.